Welcome to the 2022 Vermont Organics Recycling Summit, organized by the Composting Association of Vermont in partnership with Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. The event this year is being held once again in conjunction with International Compost Awareness Week, one of the biggest outreach and education programs of the compost industry. And the theme this year is Recipe for Regeneration, Compost. I'm Natasha Duarte, the director of the Composting Association of Vermont. I'd like to start by just thanking all of our sponsors: Community Bank, Eco Products, Vegware, Addison County Solid Waste Management District, Vermont Natural Ag Products, AgriLab Technologies, Compost Manufacturing Alliance, EcoPixel, Nature Cycle, the Vermont Produce Program of Vermont Agency of Agriculture, and Wasted, separating waste and connecting communities. Before we get going with today's program, I'd like to invite Chuck Duarte, our featured sponsor for today, to just say a few words before we get going with the program. Chuck.
Thank you, Natasha. We're glad to be here today and join everyone during International Compost Awareness Week. As a trustee of CREF, the Compost Research Education Foundation, I'm honored to be able to participate with states like Vermont and so many people committed to composting, its uses, and the variety of benefits it has for our environment and economy. And we're glad to be participating today. Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much, Chuck. All right, so we're going to move into today's program. This morning, I'm going to be sharing some information about the Association Soil Builders Program, and we'll be talking about how to make healthy soils a priority in our communities. And then at 1 p.m., the compostable packaging, love it or hate it, let's talk session will be going on, and that's going to be super interactive. We hope you can join us for that one as well. All right, and with that, I am going to move on to today's program. All right, so once again, I'm Natasha Duarte, the director of the Composting Association of Vermont, and we launched the Soil Builders Program, Education and Action, about 2 years ago. It was just before the pandemic started, and it was really envisioned to be this, interactive, in-person, hands-on workshops, and we had to pivot. And it became actually this series of interactive webinars, which was really great. And one of the benefits of that was that we recorded all of the virtual sessions and have developed quite a library on the CAV website. I'd like to just acknowledge and really thank the project partners, some of who are on this call: Athena Lee Bradley, Mark Companion, who's no longer with Lake Champlain Sea Grant, but he was instrumental in the project early on and contributed to some of the webinars. Chuck Duarte, who's with us today, Brian Giroux, Deb Nair, and Ellie Ventura. And Athena and Ellie are with us today as well. Additional thanks to all of the invited panelists and partner organizations who worked with us over the course of those 2 years. And of course, my board of directors who were supporting as we went throughout the program. And special thanks to the Lake Champlain Basin Program and the New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission for their funding of this project. So in today's discussion, I'm just going to give a recap of Soil Builders, the Soil Builders program, so we're all sort of on the same page and we have a base to start our conversation from. But really today's discussion is going to be about identifying the missing pieces and what is needed to really put healthy soil at the forefront in our communities and in our projects and in our work, and how compost can support this. So that could be opportunities as well as obstacles or things that are sort of making it hard to actually bring some of this to fruition. So the Soil Builders Program started with sort of talking about some of the regulatory drivers for changing behavior. This included everything from the ban on organics from landfill, so Act 148 in Vermont, the Vermont Universal Recycling Act that bans organics now down to the residential level from our landfills, the different clean water regulations, changing required agricultural practices that are focusing more on manure and organics management, water quality and water pollution control, runoff, all of these things. We've been supporting the evolving thoughts behind stormwater management in ways that more replicates what a functioning soil would naturally be doing, as opposed to sort of just trying to funnel everything into, one place and then deal with it from there. So we've really been evolving our thinking from, sort of forced control to a more ecosystem-based approach. It's worth mentioning, especially funded by the Lake Champlain Basin Program, there's this connection between healthy soil and water quality. And a lot of folks either miss that or don't maybe have the background or understand how integral soil health and water quality really are. And it was actually in Vermont Act 64, the Clean Water Act back in 2015, where we finally got a definition of healthy soil in statute, which I think is really significant, actually. And so healthy soil means a soil that has well-developed porous structure, is chemically balanced, supports diverse microbial communities, and has abundant organic matter. And really throughout the Soil Builders program, we talked about all of this stuff in terms of these connections between soil and water and what each of these pieces mean. And so again, this slide is really just showing that soil, when it's in a degraded state, can really become part of the problem be part of the problem with water quality in terms of nutrient and pollutant loss, both in the water as well as attached to soil particles through runoff. But it can also be this huge storage of water and a filtration system for those nutrients when water can actually infiltrate where it lands, as opposed to running off. What it really comes down to is understanding the different ecosystems that make up our state and how we interact with them and how we think about management. The program also really connected the dots between compost and that organic matter rich in soil biology that comes with compost and how that contributes to soil health. And very importantly, we kept repeating the message that not all composts are created equal, not all composts are alike. And it's very easy, and many people just talk about compost as if it were a single entity or, just one sort of product. The compost recipe, so what compost is made from, impacts or influences the nutrient profile. There are different implications for utilizing compost before it's mature or stable. So we've talked about how to judge that and how to understand if the compost you're using is mature and ready to be used. And there's a wide variety of particle size, of course. And so all of this influences the best management practices that we shared throughout this program in terms of understanding what material, whether it's compost directly or a compost-based product, is best matched for the application that folks are going to be using it for. So we actually get those intended and desired outcomes. And so throughout this program, just to touch on some of the best management practices, and all of these are, as I said, recorded and cataloged on the CAV website. But we talked about everything from residential lawn care and top dressing with compost instead of chemical fertilizers. That, of course, could be done at a larger scale, thinking about institutions and athletic fields. There's all kinds of landscaping applications and rain gardens, agricultural uses for field fertility, but also for edge of field in terms of helping address some of the erosion or runoff issues that some of our agricultural fields have. There's compost blankets. Here's another picture of that. I just wanted to sort of give some snapshots of the different applications, the combination compost blanket and sock. These socks here, the green ones, were actually seeded with pollinator seeds, and so intended to be there and support a pollinator corridor along the edge of a field. And here's some ditch work, so using it as check dams, the compost socks as check dams. Here's just an image of it, one of the socks being filled. And then berms, of course, and there's a lot of different types of berms that we see. Whoops, went through that one a little fast. And the function that they can play in both slowing water flow and filtering it at the same time. And so that's really what I wanted to cover, just sort of as an introduction. And I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen and invite folks to share their videos if you'd like. And what I was hoping for today, I can certainly share with you some of what, the lessons that we learned through this program. But what I'd like to just start with is that really for the last, since I joined the Composting Association of Vermont about 5 years ago, we've been thinking about and having tons of conversations around how do we get more compost used? We have all these programs that are diverting, food scraps and other organics, leaf and yard debris from, primarily to, or at least to a large extent, to compost facilities. We have all of this product. How do we actually promote the use, and why would we want to do that? And so, I think now, hopefully, many people I speak with, both at the state and landscape architects and different folks in communities and watershed groups, understand that compost can be this great substance and really help build the soil sponge and address the water issues and flooding or climate change issues that we have from extreme weather events. It can either store more water or help during droughts, but we're still not quite doing that. How do we move that needle in terms of actually having some standard operating practices worked into what we do in our state? And so that's sort of what I want to talk about today. And I thought that we might start by just going around the room, and I'd ask each of you, and I can sort of call out, but I'm really curious to hear your name or small group. So I think we can just do this all. You can unmute, but I'd like to hear, your name, if you're with an organization or sort of it doesn't really matter, but where you're from, and then also why you're here today. And if you either have projects or specific questions or examples of how compost is being used or healthy soil projects, but also, if there's any real stickler for you, because this work, although the Soil Builders program is done now, we are going to be continuing, of course, this work and trying to integrate and get some projects off the ground. So I'm just going to start calling on folks and invite you to unmute. Liz, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, hi. I am just here. I'm not really associated with any organization or anything. I just thought the topic sounded really interesting, and I'm trying to get more involved in that aspect of just helping build soil health and improving the lands here in Vermont. So that's why I'm here today.
Great. And we'll just go around robin, and then I'll be taking notes and sort of picking up on some things to wrap back around. Carolyn Gordon.
Hi, everybody. I'm Caroline. I'm with Wool Vermont. So we work on farm composting of food residuals a lot. And I'm also in a startup farm myself here in Tunbridge, Vermont, and interested in setting up my own little community service of food residuals composting down the road. And so I'm interested in learning more and in that kind of work that CAV is doing.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. Christina Adams.
Good morning. I'm Christina Adams. I work for resource management. I work with composters to stabilize their products with wood ash, primarily the high carbon wood ash from Bridgewater. And I do these to, continue my education, learn more about composting and
Great.
Further education really for me. And I have several projects I'm working on with VTrans right now. So I'm constantly looking for nitrogen sources because we don't have a lot of nitrogen sources for the paper fiber that I manage out of Putney. So, yeah.
Great. And I'm glad you brought up VTrans. We'll be circling back around to some VTrans and better back roads topics as well as we go. Someone has joined as just CVS WMD. I'm not sure who is associated with that, Central Vermont. If you want to go ahead and unmute and speak. And we can also circle back to you. And All right, well, we're just gonna go and feel free to raise your hand if you do want to speak. And if folks aren't comfortable speaking, you can just put that in chat or just don't unmute and I'll move on. Elena Goldstein.
My name's Alana Goldstein. I work at US EPA and at headquarters in Washington, D.C. in our program that works on reducing food waste. And I guess was your question what we're interested in or why we're here?
Sort of why you're here, what you hope to get out of it, or if you've, if you experience sort of stumbling blocks along the way of either connecting compost with soil health with water quality kind of topics.
Yeah, so this is my second year attending the conference and I find it to be extremely informative and I learn a lot. And I think especially with this topic this morning, it is one that we are trying to focus more on. So not only increasing the awareness of why compost use is important, but also sort of learning and figuring out more what the sectors are that we need to work with, whether it's local governments, landscapers, farmers, to promote compost in terms of the benefits to soil health.
Great, thank you. Thanks for being here. Jean Baptiste, or is it Jean? I'm sorry, I'm not sure. All right, we'll move on, but feel free to raise your hand if I moved on too quickly. Jenna. John.
Hi, I'm a research fellow at EPA, and I just so happen to be sitting in the same room as Alana, who just spoke. I was the reason you heard that reverberating ring noise in the background, but we figured it out. So I didn't really attend last year, but so this is my first full year of attending this conference. I did read Kiss the Ground, so that was great to see Finian Makepeace yesterday as the keynote. I personally find backyard composting really interesting. And so when I take such an interest in that and how it works and how, gratifying it is for my own personal benefit, how much I've learned from it, just how exhilarating. I always think gosh, if we could bring this type of joy to the masses and have it scaled, that'd be great. And just how to communicate that and actually get people involved. I've had elementary school students be really interested in compost when you show them the finished product. So I just personally would like to figure out how to get more people on board in that same way.
Great, thank you. Let's see, my list is jumping around, but let's see if I can keep it going. And Jenna's mic isn't working, no problem. And if you'd like to put something in chat, Jenna, we could certainly read it for you. Cameron King.
All righty, I think I'm up here. Hello.
Hi.
How are you? Okay, I can see myself now. Great. So my name is Cameron King. I'm an OVRISE postdoc fellow at the EPA, so lovely to see my team members as well. So I'm actually in the Office of Research and Development, but in a food loss and food waste team. So of course, we're dealing with a lot of projects associated with food waste recycling. And of course, compost comes right along in there. I'm more particularly focused on the contaminant issue that we're having in the compost, such as the PFAS and the microplastics. So I'm super excited about the session we have coming up in a little bit. So I'm here to learn, here to see what's going on in Vermont and just take away any information we can use to help us better support our projects here at EPA. So thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks, Cameron. Paul Kervick.
Hi, Natasha. Hi, everybody. Another great conference. I love the Kiss the Ground. That was fabulous yesterday about ether and about moisture. And I was a little late coming on this morning because I was out unloading 2 cubic yards of composted manure for our gardens. My wife Windsong's working on, so we're totally tuned into the compost right now. But when John was just speaking, I wanted to share briefly one idea that we had done last year with Natasha, which is kind of fun. My wife has been having us compost our food scraps for 40 years probably. And we use them in our little box composter and put it in the garden. And she used to have me take pictures. So over the years, I had 200 or 400 pictures of compost because it was very artistic and fun. And we were looking at maybe doing an art show at our local senior center. And we got inspired and talked to Natasha, and she got inspired. And we created a calendar. And one thing you might consider with your local school boards, because this is all about education and starting with our kids is so important. But also I've been in the nonprofit elder care. And with COVID and that whole thing, our people have been locked in their rooms. We used to have people out working in the kitchen, working in our gardens. We tried to come up with a way we could creatively get people inspired about what compost is and the positive impact it can have, not just in our soils and things, but in terms of education, in terms of having fun and being creative in life, because ultimately this is about all of us creatively addressing these challenges. So I just wanted to share that little bit with you all, and thank you, Natasha, for hosting another fabulous conference.
Thanks so much, Paul. Corey, and for folks who may have joined a little bit late, what we're doing is just going around and saying who you are and sort of what brought you to this session, or what experiences you've had, what you're particularly interested in, or what you struggle with maybe. So Corey Berman, if you want to go ahead. You're there. And we can always.
Can you hear me?
I can now, yeah.
And I'll get the video going here too. I didn't expect to. I just joined. I didn't expect to be on. To say anything. So I'm sorry. I'm coming into this. I'm just joining late. And can you repeat what's happening?
Sure. So I gave a little overview of the Soil Builders program, but right now we're just going around and saying who we are and sort of what brought you to this session, what you are particularly interested in or hope to learn, or maybe what challenges you're experiencing when we're thinking about the connecting the dots between compost, soil health, and water quality. So sort of how does that ball of wax fit together or hold together?
Sure. Well, I'm glad to be here. Glad to see folks here. And my name is Corey Berman. I'm the UVM program manager for our recycling and composting operation up here at the University of Vermont. And so really it's my role to deal with all the generated food scraps, at one point compostable products that we were dealing with here. We'll talk a little bit about that in a session coming up later this afternoon that I hope folks can be a part of. And really we're really trying to introduce folks up here at the university to the idea of, first of all, diverting the food scraps, number one, and second of all, how that can play a better role in climate change, climate awareness, and that ties into really regenerative soil practices and water quality. And there's so many parts of it here. UVM obviously is an institution of higher education. There's the hauling end, there's the food systems end, there's the food waste end. So I'm just coming as really a novice here, trying to learn everything I can, because even though I do this technically for a living, there's still so much I can learn. I mean, you really can focus just on composting, as we know by being here at this program. So just here for the ride and trying to learn a little bit more about the other worlds of composting that I'm not really involved with. Again, I do more of the operations, a little bit of the education here at UVM, really just trying to educate folks on why we should divert our food scraps and how that's better for our soils and our planet.
Great. Thank you so much, Corey. Rhonda, we can always circle back. Ruth Sipad. Ruth was here. Let's see, Sarah.
Hi, my name's Sarah. I'm the outreach coordinator for the Lamoille Regional Solid Waste Management District. We run the Lamoille Soil Composting Facility. We're actually doing an in-person tour on Thursday afternoon, so hopefully you can make it. And this is my first year at the conference. I started back in November, and my predecessor, Ellie, I see, is here as well, and she's going to be presenting this afternoon. So I've learned a lot from her and the great work that they've set up. And I loved the presentation yesterday. I thought it was really inspiring. So yeah, happy to be here. And I might have to jump off in a minute. We've got IT coming to fix something on the Wi-Fi, but hopefully I won't miss any emails. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much. And Tiffany.
Hi. I'm a former educator in Vermont who was also involved in a community garden. And something that I feel passionate about is educating young people, especially in urban environments, and creating new spaces to compost. So I'm just here for my personal development.
Great, thanks. Dan, do you want to say anything quick? Dan Goosen, there you are.
Hi, Dan Goosen from Green Mountain Compost. and CSWD. Just here, because I'm on the board of CAV and I'm helping out in the background a little bit today, but also we make lots of compost and love to see new uses for it and some of the ideas that Natasha introduced. And I'm always hopeful to see new applications in Vermont that are standard practices elsewhere or that are in wide use in surrounding states and further afield that haven't really taken on as much here. Things like compost blankets and the like. So looking for some excitement around different applications moving forward.
Great, thanks, Dan. And three of my teammates, Soil Builder project partners, Ellie, Athena, and Chuck Dupree are all here as well. If any of you would like to say a couple words, you're very welcome. Your thoughts on the program or what you've learned or what I have sort of a series of next steps and gaps that came up from our program, but if you have anything you'd like to share, that'd be great. Any order. Athena, why don't we start with you if you have something?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being on this webinar. And I learned a lot from the Soil Builders webinars and resources. And I encourage you all to, if you missed the webinar series, it's a great opportunity to learn much more about the role that composting can play and organic matter in building soils. And there's lots of resources on there as well. And I'll just put another couple plugs in on the CAV website. Natasha and I have done a lot of work on community composting, and there's some great tip sheets and resources on the CAV website under community composting projects. And then Natasha and myself and Kat Buxton are working on a fabulous on-farm community scale food scrap composting project that has just started. But there's a webinar on there and a bunch of resources on there, and stay tuned for more on that project. Thanks.
Thanks, Athena. Ellie.
Thank you. And Sarah, thank you for the kind words. That was very nice of you. I do encourage everybody to sign up to do the tour for Lamoille Soil. Johnson, Vermont isn't necessarily easy to get to, but it's worth it once you're on site for sure. And I have been part of the Soil Builders program since we submitted the grant 2 or 3 years ago. So I absolutely am excited to be here to see us wrap this program up and to learn the action steps that the communities need to be able to effectively utilize compost in a myriad of situations. So my current role too allows me access to discussions with composters and end users across the country. So any information and helpful tips that I can glean, I always soak those up so I can share them nationwide now to help us do really great things together. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. Chuck, do you want to add anything from your perspective as a, go ahead.
I mean, my expertise is really on the end use and the uses of compost and analysis of said compost and ways to develop specification and design for compost uses. And, it's been a good program to spread the concept of these more universal applications. Like somebody mentioned compost blankets earlier. These are common applications throughout the country. So we should be a little less, I don't want to say afraid, but leery might be a better word of some of these applications, and seeing the expansion of their use as ways to grow markets for compost and then uses. The more demand for compost, the more interest in producing more compost, which is a good cycle for all of us to be involved in. So, we're here as a resource when it comes to the design or spec side, but getting more buy-in from seeing farmers use different types of composts in different applications or road construction or engineered soiled applications, is really critical to see growth. And programs like this have really, added to that information and educational front. And now we got to work on those next steps.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I know there are a couple latecomers who joined. Just really quickly, if you would like to unmute and just let us know who you are and sort of your interest in this session, either success stories, what you're interested in, or obstacles, feel free to go ahead and do so now, and there'll be plenty of opportunity as well to be participating as the session continues. But if there's anyone I haven't called on, feel free to go ahead and unmute now if you'd like.
Hi, my name's Alexandra Stern. I am a postdoc fellow at EPA in the Office of Research and Development. I work really closely with Shannon Kenny and also Alana Goldstein and Cameron King, who are also on this call. And we're really interested in understanding how we can start sending more food waste to composting. And that's why I'm here today. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for joining. Anyone else like to chime in? All right, and as I said, this is intended to really be an interactive discussion. So I want to pick up on a couple threads that was raised, which is, and I guess I'll start with this idea that Chuck brought up in terms of, and several of you sort of in different ways, of the benefit of diverting organics and composting, and then having end uses for that. And the Soil Builders program, and we can drop, if someone hasn't, we can drop a link to that website directly. Oh yeah, it's right there in chat. I see it. So that link is there, and there's a lot of supporting resources that go along with the recorded webinars. But it was really everything from focusing, it wasn't so much how to compost, although there was some technical information about how to tell if your compost is ready. But we did focus on applications that folks could do, in their backyard in terms of top dressing, or whether it was just small scale, maybe at a rain garden or something at a place in your community or where you live in your neighborhood, all the way up to like VTrans and storm, larger storm. VTrans is the Vermont Department of Transportation. How these bigger transportation or building projects could utilize compost and really focus on meeting the 4% minimum organic matter goal for disturbed soils. And one of the things that we learned is that there's this sort of two-sided hesitance. The compost producers, there's a little bit of hesitance to really invest in creating either specific blends or compost products intended for specific uses without knowing that there will be a market sort of driving that, so to make it worth it. But then from the user side, whether it's landscape architects or the state, different state agencies, state projects, they're hesitant to start specifying for it or really advocating for compost and soil health metrics, because often the material that they would want to specify may not be available yet. And so we've been working these last number of years of how do we move this teeter-totter forward on both sides, so the production side as well as the end use side. And one of the things that it's really come down to that Chuck talked about, and we have a lot of information on the website about, is this idea of the specifications and some kind of testing, whether it's the U.S. Composting Council's STA, testing so folks buying compost, are sure that it meets certain, recommended metrics, or a different program. But how do we source it, and how do we make it easy and sort of develop a common language for people to, so when someone needs compost, they actually know what they're asking for and are a little bit better informed. And I'd love to say that through this 2-year project, we found all the answers and figured it all out and teed everything up to just move forward. But we have identified even structural obstacles, like, having the purchase codes in place for the state so they can even specify specific composts. And often in many of their state specifications, they just say compost or a compost media and don't get into the details of what kind of compost necessarily. At our last webinar, we were talking about maybe the need for a regional approach in terms of, wouldn't it be great if we could get New York, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, and maybe further, but at least those four together. So we understood sort of collectively in our area and across, the immediate borders, what kind of compost or compost-based materials are available, and that there is some common language across the specifications. And we're still working on that. Yeah, so I guess there's that piece. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments on that before I sort of keep going on some other related topics? So one thing that came in from the chat is, if the compost was biocomplete, wouldn't that make it flexible enough to be used in any application? And another person said they really like the regional idea. So yeah, there is a lot of education to be done around the availability of nutrients in compost and how those nutrients move. In the Lake Champlain Basin in particular, there's a lot of concern about phosphorus loading, and many of the specifications, for example, in the Vermont stormwater management plan, which is actually due to be updated for its 5-year update this year or next. It might get pushed off to next, but soon. The focus has really been on total phosphorus, so numbers like that. And often compost is the compost in Vermont anyway, that's either food scrap based or biosolid based potentially, is too rich. It looks like it's too rich in phosphorus according to the total numbers. But we've been really trying to shift the conversation to water extractable P and doing a lot of education on, it's not just, here is a material, a compost material, and this is the nutrients, and all of that might leach, because that really sort of discounts the biology that's in place. And Liz, you sort of got that in terms of using the term biocomplete. And so it's not like all of that total P number is available. And the other thing that we've really been trying to educate folks on is how much phosphorus actually enters our waterways attached to soil particles. And so if we create a healthier soil that is rich with microbial life, we've got all the goos and glues from the microbial biomass that's creating that good structure and holding soil together and supporting vegetation that also then has its roots, and we're really supporting that whole system through healthier soil, that holds our landscape in place. And that is critical. And so even though, if we had a flood, sure, there could be some nutrients entering the waterway, but just looking at these total nutrient levels doesn't really give regulators the full picture of what might be happening within a functioning ecosystem. And that's one of the messages that I think has been really tricky to help people understand, and a place that I think we need a lot more education and outreach around, in terms of just what is really available and what is really happening, and how do different nutrients move through soil, whether it's attached to particles or in soil water. And then also it's, no single nutrient exists in isolation. So there might be iron and other things in the soil that help chelate or bind some of the nutrients. Yeah, Chuck.
Yeah, I also think the aspect besides the concept of biocomplete or something like that, the physical characteristics of the compost are important for different applications. So besides the chemical and the biological, the physical structure of said compost, be it coarser or more mulch-like or finer, is important to be able to analyze and quantify. So beyond that, yes, most compost can be used for a variety of applications, but an erosion control blanket really needs a more coarse mulch-like material with less fines, or something for top dressing using on top of existing turf per se might want to be much finer without that coarse material in it, a quarter inch, et cetera. So knowing the physical properties of the compost is important to likelihood of success for the application.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because we don't want it sort of sloughing off the hill.
The finer compost will slough. It's too good at absorbing water. So you really want a more coarse material that will break up rainfall, allow it to infiltrate, help plants get established.
Yeah.
But that's where that common testing, if there's a standardized test that we all do the same gradation, the same particle sieves, then we can compare apples to apples, purchase something on the market. If everyone's doing different size sieve analysis where one does only half inch, one only measures 2 or 3 sieves, I mean, trying to come up with a universal language is critical to expansion of uses.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what other states have seen, places like Texas or California that have nothing in common in 2022, use the TMECC methods and the STA program as a basis of design and saw a ton of growth in the composters because then they had one standard everyone was trying to achieve and basis of design they could look at and adjust their production of the compost or inputs to make a marketable product. Not that they aren't marketable now, but to expand markets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are all really good points, Chuck, and a great recap of where we're at. And it is, this common language has been something that's been a bit of a recurring theme through the Soil Builders program, because we found that really just helping the producer side talk with the end user side more effectively and understand a bit more about the processes on both sides has been helpful in evolving some of the conversations. One of the things, just picking up on sort of the availability or the end use piece, and it's not really just about driving compost sales to drive compost sales and bolster up the industry, which of course that does, and that's great because that also employs more people and supports local economy in terms of soup to nuts, the hauling, the composting, and then the uses at the end. But we did actually pre-pandemic, there were some composters in Vermont who, with the increase in materials from the universal recycling law, were actually stockpiling and having a hard time at some points in the year of actually moving the finished compost. We were really looking at that. Of course, the pandemic, like everywhere, or like everything, has totally turned that upside down. And with the advent of, an increased interest of people being at home and gardening, now, often people have to wait for compost to be finished to get it. And so, whether that trend continues on as things start to, potentially normalize a little bit, we'll see. But it is really important to understand that utilizing the end product is an important piece of the diversion puzzle. And I just wanted to make that point really clearly because some of you have talked about, like, isn't it great and it feels good to divert, and and all of the benefits that we get from seeing our food scraps and leaf and yard debris as a resource to be reused and to really help close some of these local nutrient cycles. That only can happen as long as we're actually then using it. It's not just divert and make compost for the sake of making compost. The point is to actually close that loop by folding those nutrients back where we need them into our landscapes. And so that's something that's an important piece that I feel like sometimes gets missed a little bit. Yeah, Alexandra.
Thanks. I'm so sorry I had to join late, so I might have missed this. I'm really enjoying this conversation. So are there specifications for end users that already exist? Like, would a farmer know exactly what they're looking for versus someone in remediation? Are those specifications available for the producers to look to? And if not, who might be working on that, or how might we support that work at EPA?
Thanks, Alexandra. Chuck, do you want to take that or do you want me to take it?
Yeah, I mean, as a longtime U.S. Composting Council member and trustee of the Compost Research Education Foundation, the methodology, a lot of it's gathered under the TMECC test methods for the evaluation of compost and composting that the U.S. EPA published in the late 90s, early 2001 as a research document, in support of. So there are methods throughout, the country that are used widely that are, available and standardized. And then it'd be a question of taking that standardized test methods and maybe making some specific designs or, preferences for the Northeast or the state of Vermont. But yes, there are existing specs and methodologies being used by over a dozen labs, maybe almost 13 or 14 probably throughout the state, throughout the country. Even labs that aren't officially using it, it's kind of become the de facto standard over the last decade, 20 years, that we'd be glad to share with anyone that would like them. And we could discuss further if you want to reach out to me directly.
Yeah, thank you. That'd be really helpful.
Great. And I will just say that there are a number for some of the best management practices webinars that was part of this series. We've linked to a number of those specifications on the CAV website as well. So that's another place that you can find relevant resources. I think it's also about understanding, like you mentioned sort of farmers, like would farmers know what they need or how to do it. And one of the things that I found in talking with the agricultural sector is there's a lot of focus on utilizing compost, or more familiarity maybe of utilizing compost for field fertility, which is great, absolutely. But it is a different type of compost, like Chuck was saying previously, in terms of maybe the particle size or how you fill the socks, or slightly different applications that can really play an effective role of the farm to road connections, where there might be edge of field erosion to support, whether it's to support, vegetative buffer strips or pollinator strips that a lot of folks that I know are starting to get more interested in, or those check dam type of applications. And so sort of broadening the way that people think about compost and its uses is, I think, a piece of the story that people kind of forget about sometimes, or just maybe are less familiar with. We all know, like I'm a home composter, I love it, and I put it in my garden and I grow stuff in it. And that, I think, is sort of the more ubiquitous idea of how to use compost, but it really goes quite a bit further than that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges with the agricultural standpoint is that many of farmers are educated around chemical NPK. So they're very familiar with the chemical forms that are sold in the markets of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, where compost provides organic forms of those, not organic as an EPA program or Whole Foods. Organic is in a chemical structure. So it's a different speciation of nitrogens, of phosphorus, of potassium, within a combination of some are there that are the chemical forms. It's a combination of NPK. So farmers would need to, and people in the middle need to better educate themselves on the types of available nutrients within a compost, because the way it's analyzed and in the way it's used, you need to be able to translate that data versus a bag of Scott's fertilizer I buy at the store, or they would buy from their seed distributor, their chemical fertilizer distributor as a farmer, because it's a different form of nutrient. So that gets a little bit confusing if you're not as familiar, but there are ways to convert that and to apply that and to think through the process and figure out what your nitrogen application rate would be per year, or your phosphorus application rate, and kind of back into a true agronomic plan. And what we've seen in some states is you can even customize. If UVM or some of these labs came on, you could customize a reporting package for a farmer. So like some states like Texas DOT, the labs in Texas that do the testing have a form they send out and report with the data for erosion control. So, pretty simple for the farmer. The producer, you check the box for erosion control, send it to the lab. They give you the report for erosion control compost. And then the DOT can compare it to their spec and say, yes, this meets, no, it doesn't, format it and standardize them. It's the great one benefit of technology, not that there are many these days, Twitter, 2022, you can standardize some of these things and create some level of mass customization to follow that data through. So in theory, a state like Vermont could work with their ag department to say, this is the data farmers need. Let's do this package so we get these same reports and the same information. I mean, that's a much higher level next step, but those are things that could be accomplished and have been.
Yeah, we've really been looking to examples from other states in terms of how to address some of the barriers of use in terms of knowing what to even ask for on a lab report. and also knowing how to interpret what you get back from the lab report. So those kinds of nuts and bolts, but also helping, some of the state folks, especially in terms of like erosion control or revegetation on, roadways, for example. What is the material available, and how does that, I have heard of some examples where, like the pH might be off by 0.2 and the material is refused. Like what are the most important characteristics, and where is a range that material could potentially fall in that would still get the job done, as opposed to, you're just off on one thing and so forget about it. And those are some of the things that we need to be pushing and educating on as well. And I think if we were to sort of collectively move, and I'm beginning to think like regionally would be better than just individual state, but whatever, wherever we can get a toehold in, I think is the idea in terms of being able to stand, to lower the bar of access to utilizing compost and compost-based products. I wanted to sort of shift to some of what the conversation in chat, but does anyone have any other comments or questions about this specifically before we move on?
See, Natasha, I just wanted to throw out that I think we need to get our legislators involved in doing some legislation around this to make uniform specifications so that we all know what is in the compost and what the specifications are on individual compost. I mean, we have to make it simple so that the compost industry and the manufacturers of the compost can qualify and can be permitted or whatever it would be in terms of that vision. But I think it's really important. It's like compostable products too. If we're not going to regulate compostable products, they're going to continue to mess with the compost product, the results, if people use that. So I just throw that out and would love some commentary on that.
Anyone want to chime in?
Of course, I will chime into that one, but not because of the compostable products, but just legislatively, I get a little cautionary around that. Mainly because we have really good organizations that are working on that, and it's hard to get them all to coalesce and collaborate and agree on definitions and regulations and specs. And my preference is to see the experts lead establishing specs and regulations, because some of our legislation tends to get a little cart before the horse-ish. And if our legislator, we're having this discussion today because all of us have something to learn in this area. And we, for the most part, spend a lot of time on this topic. So when we are asking legislators to make choices and decisions on something that they aren't spending as much time on, I just get a little nervous because I now have experience where well-intended legislation looked great on paper, but it has had a lot of implementation challenges in other states. So we do need policy specs uniformity, but I don't know that we're ready for our legislators to set those at this point.
Anyone else want to comment? I'll just add that I think that there are other vehicles that we're currently using, like the Vermont Stormwater Manual, Stormwater Management Manual is at its 5 years. We did a lot of outreach and education for the 5 years ago for the first round, and got that soil health 4% organic matter index worked into that. And then that sort of was sent out, and they did some outreach and education, and I did some education with DEC stormwater program, our state stormwater program on that. But what really was coming back from that was people not understanding what amending disturbed soil to 4% organic matter meant. Like, how do you do that? Where is the application? And so we've actually addressed that throughout the Soil Builders program as well. And how, what are the rules of thumb, and how do we simplify some of the implementation piece of it, in terms of maybe just, if this is what your compost is like, or your compost soil product is like, how do you meet those target goals? And then also working with the state to understand and better provide more, because initially anyway, when that 4% rule first came out, they were just, my understanding is that they were just giving out waivers and allowing people to not, to sidestep it and not meet it because no one really knew what was available. How do you do it? What I think I need I can't find. And it was a change of standard operating practice. And so that gets confusing. But I think some of those modes for getting the change of practice together. And I know from the Vermont DOT that they're actually undergoing an update between this year and next as well. And I'm working with them to try to get some, some different specifications worked in. So I think there's work to be done at the state level. I'm not sure that and I think it would be great to try to help our legislators understand the conversation and context a little bit more, but I'm not sure we need legislation right now around that either, I guess, at some point maybe. But I'd be happy to hear other opinions in either direction. Or is that helpful, Athena, at all to thinking about this more?
I just want to see some change and more education out there. And it's just frustrating that there's still so much concern over the use of compost around lakes when it really isn't necessary, but we need to manufacture appropriate compost and what that means for people.
Yeah.
So,
no, agreed.
Thanks, Natasha. Thanks, Ellie.
And so let's see, I do want to pull back, and this is actually sort of tied to where we've been going a little bit. Corey offered in the chat that he'd love to see UVM become a stronger partner in doing some of this research, whether classroom-based or through the facility grounds department on campus. And that is a great idea. And Ellie chimed in saying that Dr. Eric Roy has been in the news a lot for he's working on microplastics in soil right now. And I do think that there is really an opportunity for UVM to become a stronger partner. A few things that I do know are going on in addition to Dr. Eric Roy's work. One, I actually didn't include it in the slides at the beginning, but I do have some great slides from UVM of compost socks being used in construction areas on the property. What I think would be great to have more of is some education that, just because it is a university, right, to not just have it be in use, but have it be, even if it's temporary signs, like what are these green things around, and what are the, what a lot of folks don't even know that there's compost, like a compost-based blend in there. And so helping, just sort of, it's an opportunity for a high visibility outreach, maybe. I'll also just point to Dr. Deb Nair at UVM, who's a soil scientist, a soil ecologist who was on the Soil Builders program. And we have some fabulous recorded webinars by her for folks who are really interested in the soil function piece and delving a little bit more into that. And then Dr. Stephanie Hurley is another person at UVM who has been working on compost. And one thing I do want to just say with her work is that she's been really looking at how compost functions in water retention, bioretention settings. So where you're really filtering all kinds of water into a small sort of place, and how that works. And I just want to throw that out there because I feel like her work is taken out of context sometimes, and she rightly draws some flags about compost use and how deep we really into the soil profile we really need, a nutrient-rich compost right now, how the specs are written. And this is one of the things I'm hoping will be changed is for bioretention. It just talks about the soil media down to like 24 or 36 inches, something like that. We really don't need a nutrient-rich compost all the way at those depths. And we would expect to see more nutrient leaching from that. Really, the idea is to have it help establish the vegetation at the top. And so there are some nuances there that can be tricky to think through. But I think ideally in my mind is to shift the question or the whole conversation away from how do we, how can we more broadly manage our stormwater and help it infiltrate where it lands, as opposed to really thinking about, we're going to take all this water and focus it into this tiny little postage stamp of a place and expect the soil to be able to handle that. Because it's when you get these super saturated or really, waterlogged soils that the function starts to change. And what happens chemically and biologically in the soil is different in those conditions than in a well aerated and less overflowed with water, less saturated state. And so I think that's also one of the things that I think is just a little challenging maybe when we're having these conversations, is finding places to add in the nuance and how can we help people. So many people just want sort of like an answer. And what we've really been trying to do through this program is help people understand that there are a lot of different ways to go about this, and that not all of these ways are appropriate in every situation. And so how can we feel more comfortable in that, not gray area, but understanding the nuance of when to use what and how when it comes to interacting with our ecosystems or our different landscapes, I think is super important. Anyone want to chime in on that, or any other topics that you want to bring up? There's a couple other things I have on my little list, but I definitely want to give airspace for others to share. All right. Well, feel free to keep putting stuff in the chat as well, or raise your hand or just unmute and interrupt me. But I think it also, I wanted to tie some of this conversation back to sort of the call for action that I heard from Finney and Makepeace as the Kiss the Ground keynote yesterday. And I know not all of you on this call were able to participate in that, and the recording will be available probably next week or the following week. But so if you want to catch up, but he was really sort of doing this call to action around our response ability. So how can we, as we're learning, where can we help educate others and do the outreach piece? And what is our responsibility? Because we can respond and we have some more tools in hand than maybe your neighbors or your family or friends or your town select board or who those folks are. And I think sort of addressing that and really being thoughtful about what might be needed to reach out and empower all of us to do what we can to make changes in our own yard and how we manage our own organics, food scraps, and yard debris, as well as at the community level. I wanted to pick up a little bit of what John said at the beginning in terms of really being interested in engaging with elementary school kids or younger kids, and just point to Friday's workshop session at 1 p.m. is actually going to be from two fabulously dynamic educators, Kat and Julie, sharing essentially their curriculum that they utilize from K through 12 schools, sort of tying school composting, which has become certainly more ubiquitous in Vermont anyway, and to the teaching kids about soil health and water quality and hydrology, and how do we have all of that. And what we hear back from a lot of folks who are engaged in the school composting programs is then it becomes this new generation of kids who are then engaged in helping their parents remember, oh, you have to take the PLU stickers off. We need to, they're the ones who are helping make those changes in home or understand how to use the finished compost at home or in communities. And I think it would be great. And one, to sort of amplify those programs and that message and work to empower kids to have that role and to be the ones to share their information. Because I think kids are sort of like, Athena, just back to your legislation idea. I don't know it's legislation, but like, how great would it be to get a bunch of kids from around the state of Vermont who are involved in their school composting programs to go and present to the legislature, right? Like, that's the kind of thing that people somehow listen more to than necessarily whether I'm the one who goes to a committee hearing and talk about it. And it's like, yes, and we're busy and we're fitting in all these people and it's all this testimony and experts trying to help us understand this, but something a little bit broader. And I know that there are definitely similar things around climate action. And, I just think that there's a place to sort of elevate the voice of our younger generation. And so I'm curious to hear if anyone is already engaged in that, or if anyone has ideas, or if you think that's a good idea and we should, would that help, I guess, is one question I have. And you don't all have to jump in at once. Yeah, Paul.
Hi, back. I think it's a brilliant idea. I think that, to me, and part of our Vermont Restoration Council work is looking at education as primary, and our children are the future. But I also have a near and dear place in my heart for the elders in our community. And Vermont, by 2030, is going to have the oldest population in the United States. And this is a time, in my experience, and being blessed to have traveled around different parts of the world, that when you get to be in your 50s and 60s, it's a time when you give your gift back to the community. You don't have to worry about sitting there getting fed pharmaceuticals and watching TV all day. You actually have a whole rich life. And I'm looking for ways, and the reason we did that photography thing with the compost, which could be fun for the kids and for the elders, and we have a contest, and it gets them creatively thinking and learning about the beauty in things that are old. So I'd love to see, and I'm willing to talk to you, Natasha, further about some of our Restoration Council work here in the state, but we're really about education and a lot of different things. But I think if we can bring the elders together who may have time, and maybe we've got some retired teachers or farmers that could actually work with the kids and develop something that they can present to the legislature. But I think it is time about composting our community. And so bringing those pieces together, I think, would be really, really important. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, and you and I have had a lot of conversations about that. I think that would be great to try to noodle on that a little bit more. Yeah, John, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention on this topic in schools. So I'm from Wisconsin, and back where I'm from, there's a local elementary school that just landed a food waste warrior grant from World Wildlife Fund. And I was speaking with them because I said, I want to do a proposal with elementary schools and sort of composting, but also like, what is it that schools are interested in that they're willing to adopt? And they said, well, curriculum is important, but they also said, we're interested in community supported agriculture in terms of like having local food, especially in like a farm heavy state like Wisconsin, come to our school. That way we don't have to rely heavily on outside vendors, and God only knows where that food is coming from. So I thought that was just a really interesting suggestion on their part. And for me, it's always like, schools are so different because it's like some are really on board and they really want to implement this stuff, and then others, it's not even remotely on their radar of something that they're paying attention to. And I've noticed some states and school districts have done it really well. So I'm always looking for ways to try and better understand how those school districts got that implemented, and again, how they scaled it in a way that like it's useful for many, many people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I think that's great. I think in Vermont, there is a strong sort of farm to school program that's statewide that we could share some information about, but I think there's always more to be done. And that's one way of just really helping extend the outreach and education, I think. Does anyone else want to chime in here? Or any other thoughts?
I just wanted to make a comment on farm to school. I think that's an excellent idea to partner with Farm to School and the Farm to School Network. I'm not sure what's happening in Vermont
And actually, I more recently was working with Boston Public Schools, and they have huge local initiatives, but not totally working on food waste and not really focused on farm to school. So bringing schools that aren't maybe doing farm to school in and having compost education through that, I think is an excellent idea. USDA, I think they just like doubled or really increased the amount of funding for farm to school. So supporting schools in writing grants so they can win some of that funding, hire people to help with education, I think is an excellent, excellent idea.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's, honestly, that's one of the obstacles that I personally run up against all the time is getting great ideas and then having the sort of the human capacity piece to run with them. And I see that in schools and with farms and everybody. And so, Alexandra, I really appreciate your recognition that school, like there's these funds available, but schools need help too in terms of writing those grants and accessing those funds and figuring out how to implement, right? So that's, of course, we won't even get into how the pandemic has added all kinds of different wrinkles to this whole thing. But similar to the calendar idea that Paul shared earlier that we did last year, we had this idea of doing a contest and really partnering schools with senior communities, but not necessarily the legs to move it forward. And so I think that's, I think that's why I've really been trying to bring around this idea of all in, right? So that's something that's, certainly thought of in terms of the water quality or water health piece. It's the farmers, but it's also the developers and it's the business people and it's the urban centers and it's the foresters and the residents, we all have a part to play. And I think even with this sort of implementation of the ideas to move some of this outreach and education forward, we again need an all-in approach because a lot of, I could just say for the Composting Association of Vermont, I'm the only staff person. And so I don't necessarily have we don't have the capacity within the association to run on all these good ideas, but the way we do as much of the good work as we can is by leveraging our partnerships, whether that's with our solid waste folks or schools or, organizations like Rural Vermont. How do we sort of, all pull together and leverage those partnerships to help get some of this done? We sort of need the step 2 of the idea generation, I think. How do we all start rolling up our sleeves and jumping in? I've also, through the Soil Builders program, have really been working more with the natural resource conservation districts and some of the watershed groups, which has been phenomenal because they are experts at harnessing. Some of them have a little bit of staff, but they're also experts at harnessing volunteers in communities and community scale projects. Paul, you wanted to.
Yeah, just
again?
briefly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just as an idea was popping in, that we do have something in Vermont, which is a pretty interesting network. And I'm wondering if you were to develop something about the kids and the elders or whatever the thing would look like as announcing through all of the Front Porch Forum networks, which goes to most all communities in Vermont, and see what kind of response might be to maybe setting up a program where you could do a demonstration in one of the schools or something that people then could go on Zoom and, you'd be able to reach a number of players and leverage that. But I think that's one thing that just popped into my head that might be worth checking out. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So we're nearing our time. Any other comments or topics that you wish we'd covered that hadn't come up? Thank you all for participating. It's really helpful to, again, hear from different folks, a different mix of folks. And I do hope that the resources available on the CAV website are useful to you. I'll just offer, if you do think of things, or if you think we said something was there and you can't find it, feel free to shoot me an email. And it's, that's the website management is also an ongoing project. So we could certainly be bringing that up. And I'm just going to share my screen again for a quick second to sort of do a close unless there are other things that people would like to bring up. All right, so more to just sort of the nuts and bolts. If folks are getting U.S. Composting Council continuing education credit for this session, the code that you need to insert into the form, which you can download from our site if you don't already have it, is DRAIN. And so that's just that little piece. And then I'd just like, we've mentioned it a few times, but the compostable packaging love it or hate it session is at 1 p.m. And that's going to be another very interactive session where you guys will have good opportunity to share your opinions and ask your questions. And then today at 3:30, there's still time to register for the in-person, for those of you who are local, in-person Johnson Sioux composting workshop at Shelburne Farms Market Garden with Jim Stiles. And so we'll be there from 3:30 to 4:30 today. And with that, I think that was kind of all I had for today. Thank you all once again for participating. I really appreciate it. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. We will be having, sort of continuing conversations, as one-off webinars throughout the year. So stay informed for that. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.